Hi, Pastor John. My name is Greg.
Hi, Greg.
And my question is regarding the Christian life, particularly the flesh in Romans 7. Really hits home. But Paul always says something amazing in verse 24 where he calls the flesh the body of death. So can you explain exactly what is the flesh?
Romans chapter 7 is a very definitive text. And it must be understood accurately, or you can be confused about the reality of spiritual life. So that's the place you want to go to ask the question that's on your mind. And the issue really begins in verse 14 of that chapter. It's the back half of that chapter. Paul says this, and he is a believer here. He's not only a believer, he's a mature believer. He's not only a mature believer, he's an apostle of Jesus Christ and the supreme teacher of theology on the planet. He is arrived. He is a spiritual father who has plumbed the depths, the deep knowledge of God. But he says this, I am of flesh, sold into bondage to sin. Which is a stunning statement for a believer to make. It's similar to the one he makes in 1 Timothy where he says, I'm the chief of sinners. But what he is saying is, I recognize that I am still of flesh. All that means is, I am human. I still retain all the fallenness of my humanity. Okay? I still recognize the fallenness of my humanity. And it is not just there, it is there powerfully so that I am still in bondage to it. I can't fully free myself from it. And then he begins to sort of parse that, dissect it, to tell us how does it show up? What do you mean you're in bondage to sin? You're the great apostle. You're the lover of Christ. What are you talking about? You're the guy who said, my conscience is clear. I know nothing against myself. I've lived godly and in sincerity before you and in the world. You're the guy who says your conscience doesn't accuse you. What are you talking about here? Well, he's saying there is still the reality of the fact that I am human. And although I have been converted and regenerated and born again, I have not yet been relieved of my humanity. And it shows up like this. What I am doing, I don't understand. I'm not practicing what I would like to do. I'm doing the very thing I hate. So the way this flesh shows up is, there are things I desire to do. There are things I desire not to do. And I find myself having a hard time with both of those. I end up doing what I don't want to do, and I end up not doing what I want to do. So the flesh, which is humanity, just our remaining fallen humanity, that's what that is. In all its parts, not just the actual physical body, but the humanity that's in our brain as well, all of our humanness. He says, I do the very thing I do not want to do, but he says this, very important, verse 17, it's no longer I who am the one doing it. It is sin that is in me. And here he bifurcates himself in a sense. Here he splits himself and identifies an I, an ego, a new person. And this is Galatians 2:20. I'm crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I. There's a new I. And this new I has holy longings, holy aspirations, holy desires, wants to do what's right, wants not to do what's wrong. And he's in touch with that reality. That's the experience of a true believer. You want to do the things that are right. You want to honor the Lord. You want to express your love to Him in obedience and holiness. But sin dwells in me. And then he goes further and says, I know nothing good dwells in me, that is in my flesh. In other words, there is this all bad humanity. Flesh simply means humanity. That is all bad. There's nothing in it that is good in the sense of being acceptable to God. So, willing, he says, is present in me. The things I want are the things that are right and good and holy. But the doing of the good is not. Then he goes through the cycle again. The good that I want, I don't do. I practice the very evil I don't want. But if I'm doing the very thing I don't want, I'm no longer the one doing it, but sin which dwells in me. So here's the way that I view this, and it's a simple way to understand it. A believer is a new creation with new longings, new aspirations, new desires, new impulses, incarcerated in unredeemed humanity. And for us to get all of that is right and good and holy and righteous out is a challenge because it has to penetrate through our humanity. And our humanity makes war against that
So the humanity
internal.
is the body of death.
Well, I'll get to that point in just a second. I'm maybe taking too long. So he says, the principle of evil is present in me. It is in my humanity. But I concur with the law of God in my inner man. So there's an inner reality, a new life, a new person, a new creation with all these holy longings incarcerated. Now, why does he call it the body of death? Here's the answer. In ancient times, when someone committed a crime of murder, one of the ways in which the murderer was punished was to have the victim of the murder, the corpse, tied to his back, strapped to his back. This would be a slow death because the corruption of that body would then enter the healthy murderer and eat him to death. Paul sees the presence of his humanity as a corpse strapped to him. That's the language he's talking about. Now, the resolution for this doesn't come in chapter 7, but it comes in chapter 8, where he says, and this is his hope and the hope of every believer, he says, we ourselves groan, verse 23, within ourselves, waiting eagerly for our adoptions. What does that mean? The redemption of our body. The redemption of our body. It's in hope we have been saved. And our hope is for redemption of our body. What's that? That's the resurrection. That's the glory. So for a believer, when a believer dies, the Spirit is already recreated. What happens for us is death is simply the liberation of the regenerate inner man from the incarceration of the body of death, namely our flesh.